Welcome to the MPC session, and the first talk is by Geoffrey about new protocols for secure quality test and comparison.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. Hi everyone. So I'm going to talk about new protocols for secure quality test and comparison. So it's about secure computation. You probably already heard of it, but just as a quick recap, in case you just arrived and want to remember a bit how it works. Secure computation is the task for a group of parties to compute a function on their respective private inputs. And the secure computation protocol should satisfy two properties. It should be correct in the sense that the parties want to be guaranteed that what they learn at the end of the protocol is indeed the result of evaluating the function on the joint input of the parties. And it should be private, meaning that no single party should be able to learn anything more about the private inputs of the other parties than what he can already deduce from his own private input together with the output he got in the protocol. So in this talk, I will focus mainly on two very specific types of secure computation protocol, namely equality test and comparison, which are very typical example of secure computation task. So equality test refers to the task of securely computing the equality predicate, which checks whether two input strings are equal or not. And in this talk, all protocols I will discuss will not output directly the result of the predicate in the clear, but they will output uniformly random additive shares of the result. Especially for equality tests, it's important to mention it because if you don't insist on having additive shares as output, there are very efficient and very simple solutions. But outputting uniformly random additive shares is a core property if you want to integrate those protocols into larger scale secure computation protocol. You don't want to have the result in the clear if you want to use this as a building block. And so secure comparison, as you can guess, that the task for two parties to securely compute the comparison predicates and obtain, as before, uniformly random additive shares of the bits, which is one if and only if the first input is bigger than the second one. So both secure comparison and equality test have a long history in cryptography. They have been used, so secure comparison in particular is historically the first MPC protocol that was ever studied by Andrew Yao in 1986. And both have found a large number of applications as building blocks in large-scale secure computation protocols. So you will hear about secure comparison and secure equality test each time you want to securely compute, securely evaluate sorting, or if you want to do secure machine learning, then it usually becomes an important building blocks. Same thing if you want to securely solve combinatorial problems and so on. And in most of these applications, in particular secure computations have been very often pointed out in papers that had actual implementations of those applications as the main efficiency bottleneck. So improving its efficiency in large-scale secure computation is the starting point and the focus of this work. So in this work, I will describe new protocols for for securely computing equality test and comparison. Those protocols will be in the preprocessing model, which means that there is a preprocessing phase during which the two parties interact before they get to know their inputs. And they can use this preprocessing phase to generate correlated random coins. And then in the online phase, when they get to know their actual input to the protocol, they can consume these correlated random coins to speed up the computation. And it's known that if you have access to a preprocessing phase, then the online phase can be made information theoretically secure and at the same time extremely efficient. And I will insist on having protocols with very strong efficiency guarantees in the online phase. Furthermore, the protocols I will design will be designed solely from obvious transfer, that I will call OT in this talk. So OT is a very fundamental primitive in MPC. It's known to be MPC complete, which means that if you have access to an OT primitive, you can securely compute any function. And it's also known that you can implement it from a wide variety of assumptions. So you can instantiate that from many assumptions. So just as a quick recap, obvious transfers, that's a two-party protocol. You have a sender here and a receiver. The sender has two messages, M0 and M1, and the receiver has a selection bit And with the selection bit, you should learn the corresponding input of the sender. And the Oblivious Transfer protocol has two main security properties. It should be impossible for the verifier to learn more than a single message. So this verifier should not learn anything about M1 minus B. And it should be impossible for the sender to learn any information whatsoever about the selection bit of the receiver. So quick facts about Oblivious Transfer. It's known that Oblivious transfers can be made very efficient if you want to amortize their cost over many instantiations. This is known as OT extension, and so while Oblivious transfers require public key cryptography, which is quite heavy in comparison to symmetric key cryptography, after some constant number of base Oblivious transfer, you can compute an arbitrary polynomial number of OTs using only cheap symmetric operation, such as evaluating some hash functions. So they are particularly suited if you want very efficient realization of large-scale secure computation protocol. We also know that OTs can be packed for short messages. So just to give a rough intuition, there is a 2013 paper by Kanjit and Kumarasan that explained that there is a natural reduction from 1 out of n OT to log n instances of 1 out of 2 OT. And in the case where the messages are short, this reduction is particularly efficient. And so plugging in an efficient realization of 1 out of n OT gives a way to pack log n 1 out of 2 OT into a smaller, with a smaller communication. So you shave essentially a logarithmic factor if your input messages are small enough. And furthermore, we also know that OTs can be very efficiently obtained directly from a random OT. So random OT is just this protocol, but the primitive picks all input messages at random and sends them to the parties. And we know that if we have a random OT primitive, we can very efficiently convert that to an OT primitive. So that was for the quick facts about OT. So let's start with the first protocol, which is quite simple. So if you want to securely compute the equality predicate between two strings, it's well known and it has been used in previous work that this is equivalent to looking at the Hamming weight of their exclusive OR. You take X and Y, you XOR them, you look at the Hamming weight of this exclusive OR. If it's 0, the strings are equal, otherwise they are different. So we'll just rely on this very basic observation here. And the goal here will be to design an OT-based protocol that shrinks the size of the inputs. By shrinking, I mean that the parties will start with inputs X and Y of some length L. And at the end of this shrinking protocol, they should end up with a string X prime and Y prime of length, which will be here roughly log L, so that X prime will be equal to Y prime if and only if X is equal to to Y, sorry. So this shrinking gadget is quite natural when you have an OT primitive. The sender will just pick many random masks, and it's important here to observe that those random masks are over a very small set. Each of them is about log L bit long. And he will use that to mask either Xi or 1 minus Xi. The receiver can only learn one of the two with Yi, so essentially he learns a masked version of Xi XORed with Yi. So both parties now have values Ri and Si, which are equal if and only if Xi XORed with Yi is 0. So if they sum locally these values, we can see that the sum of all the Ri is equal to the sum of all the Si, if and only if the two strings are equal. And importantly, all this computation can be computed mod L plus 1, because we know that the Hamming weight of a string of length L is at most L, so no modular reduction occurs if we do everything mod L plus 1. So simply by locally computing this sum now, our two parties obtain inputs X prime and Y prime, which are equal if and only if the initial inputs are equal, and but whose size is exponentially smaller than the size of the initial inputs. So the idea of the protocol will just be to perform several rounds of this shrinking, starting from L-bit long strings and obtaining exponentially smaller strings each time. And when the inputs are very, very small, say 2 or 3 bits long, then they can just use some brute force protocol to evaluate the quality predicate. Like if you have 2 bits input, evaluating the quality predicate just amounts to securely evaluating an AND, which is very easy. Overall, this gives you a protocol with logstar L rounds, and this can be upper bounded by logstar of kappa, where kappa is a security parameter. Because if the inputs are longer than the security parameter, we can let the parties first hash their inputs, preserving the equality between their inputs with except with statistically negligible probability, and shrinking the size to security parameter a bit long. It uses only OT on small strings, because all computation being done mod L+1, the bigger OT that we use transmit messages of log L bits. So which means that we can apply all the efficient OT extension protocol that I briefly mentioned earlier, and it can be extremely efficiently preprocessed. By evaluating this shrinking protocol on uniformly random inputs, in the online phase the party only have to XOR their private inputs with masks generated in the preprocessing phase. So when I say extremely efficient, in practice, if you want to securely compare 128 bits input, known protocol will in general exchange, say, 60,000 to 80,000 bits. Our protocol exchange a bit less than that, 20,000 bits, and in the online phase we will only exchange 300 bits. So it's really like a few bunch of bits exchanged in the online phase just to correct the result of the preprocessing phase, but almost everything is done in the preprocessing phase. So that was for equality test. That's quite a simple protocol. And now we want to look at secure comparison, which is a bit more complex, and which will in particular rely on equality test as a sub-protocol. The idea here is again to have some shrinking procedure where we start from 2 strings, and we want to obtain a smaller string so that the comparison predicate between those smaller strings is preserved. So the idea for doing so is again a quite natural and simple idea, which is to divide the 2 strings, x and y, into blocks. Say if the strings are L bit long, you will divide them in blocks, each block being roughly square root of L bits, and you will have roughly square root of L blocks. And then we know that to securely compute x and y, it suffices to securely compare, x and y, it suffices to securely compare the first block on which x and y differ. So we can just like somehow ignore the blocks on which are equal and just select the first block on which they are different and just apply the comparison on this block. So the goal now for the parties will be to obliviously select the first block in their input strings in which they differ. And so to do so, it's quite natural to use equality tests to check which are the blocks which are not equal. So here it's a sequence of equality tests and local transformation. By applying a bunch of equality tests in parallel, they obtain additive shares of values which are either 0 or 1. 1 if the blocks are equal, 0 when they are different. They do some swapping and summing. Like swapping, it's just if they have a 1 and transform that to a 0 by letting one of the parties locally XOR his input with a 1. And then they sum, which means that the the value number I will receive the sum of all the previous values from 1 to I. So as a result, you obtain here 0, and starting from the first block on which the strings differ, everything now is non-zero. Everything is summed to something bigger than 0. To flatten that again, there is a second round of equality test, which transforms that to a string of 0, followed by only once. And a very last simple manipulation is just to subtract each shared value with the previous value. So you obtain zeros everywhere except from this only value here, which is exactly the position of the block on which the 2 input strings differ. So just by applying a few equality tests and some local transformation plus a few things that I've hidden a bit, the parties can obliviously obtain a selection vector with zeros everywhere and a 1 at a single position, which is secretly shared between them. So after that, they will locally compute the inner product between their own input strings and the secret shared vector. obtaining additive shares of values uv, which are so that u is bigger than v if and only if x is bigger than y. Intuitively, this is not sufficient for the shrinking that I wanted to get, because I started from string x and y of length L bits. Now I have strings of length square root of L bits, but my input string were known in the clear by the parties, while now the strings are secretly shared between the parties. So what's missing is a way to convert the task of securely comparing secret shared strings to the task of securely comparing strings locally known by each of the parties. Unfortunately, it turns out that in our situation, there is a very efficient way of doing so. So that relies on a new lemma, which is quite interesting in itself, but I won't give the details of the lemma, but intuitively what it says is that if you can ensure that two constraints are guaranteed, the first one being that the secret sharing is done over zt, where t is bigger than twice the size of u and v. So we know that u and v are of size at most 2 to the square root of L, so we will enforce the fact that t will be twice bigger than that. We can do that because we choose the modulus in our OT protocols. And if we can also ensure that u and v will be different, which will be the case if and only if the input strings are different initially, then there is a local procedure with no interaction whatsoever, which converts u and v into strings x prime and y prime, so that x prime is lower than y prime if and only if u is lower than v. So if we want to apply this local conversion procedure, the only thing we need to ensure is that the initial inputs x and y are different. And there is a relatively straightforward way of doing so. We just let the owner of the input x append a 0 to his input. The owner of the input y appends a 1 to his input. This preserves the comparison predicate, but at the same time ensures that the inputs will be different. So given that, the parties can just apply this shrinking procedure, obtain those shares, locally convert those shares into values known to each party, and apply the shrinking procedure again. They can do several rounds of shrinking like that. As before, they can end up and they can wait until they get very small string on which they can apply a brute force protocol. It takes log rounds. An alternative is to do a few constant number of rounds of shrinking, and then apply any other known protocol for secure comparison to get kind of the best of both worlds, smaller number of rounds, but still the efficiency benefits of these techniques. And so this protocol can be very efficiently interfaced with other existing protocols, and asymptotically its communication is optimal. It's a big O of L bits in total, counting preprocessing plus online phase. And in the online phase, again, the communication is extremely small, less than 2000 bits exchange for any strings of interest. And so, yeah, that's essentially it. Thank you for your attention.
Questions?
Hey.
Oh.
If I understood correctly, you compare, so when you do your comparison computation,
Yes.
you check each block if they are equal or not.
Yes.
But don't you learn more than that normally you should learn in that case?
No, because you don't learn it in the clear. We use an equality test whose output is secretly shared between the parties.
Okay, so the question
So
is,
the question is,
I use the
don't
microphone.
I learn? Yeah, sorry. The question is, if I understood it well, doesn't that reveal too much information if we let the parties securely compute an equality test between all blocks? Because in which case they could learn which blocks are equal or not. But here we do everything obliviously. When they do an equality test, they don't learn the result. They only learn additive shares of the result, which are uniformly random. So locally, each party has no information, but they can do now manipulation on these additive shares until they end up with these strings. And until there, they learn absolutely nothing because they have uniformly random shares of that. And then the conversion to those inputs cannot learn them more information, simply because it's local. Because it involves no further communication, and this reveals perfectly no information to the party, then it is mathematically guaranteed that those local inputs that they learn gives them absolutely no information on the initial inputs. The only thing that they guarantee is that they preserve the equality predicate.
Do you have any intuition on how to generalize this to an n-party protocol?
So that's a good question. I think it's not such a simple one. So here we use the fact that those two inputs initially are in the clear. In an n-party protocol, you would not have that. You would have, I think, secret shares, for example, of two inputs, and you want to securely compare them. So that crucially depends on exactly the form of those secret shares. If you have bit-by-bit shares. So to be honest, I've not really looked at it in details. My first intuition is that the techniques here are really tailored to two parties. Typically, the quality test itself, which is the building block of the secure comparison, is a bit hard to generalize to more than two parties. I've tried a bit, and it was more boiling down to finding another solution in the case of n parties rather than extending those ideas to n parties. So my first intuition is that this is rather specific to two parties, and but I mean, there might be a non-trivial way of extending that, but it's not entirely obvious.
Thank you. Okay, and our second speaker is Meirov, who's going to talk about minimizing communication in honest majority MPC.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that's right. And this is work that I did together with Peter, who is there in the audience. So maybe I'll just spend 1 minute to talk a bit about why I'm here. So the work that I'm presenting here is actually done while I was at Philips Research. I'm not working there anymore, but this work is still from the period. Philips you might know from your television machine or from your coffee machine. So you might wonder what does Philips has to do with multi-party computation. Actually, Philips is nowadays more doing medical stuff, so they're selling CT scanners and MRI scanners and all that sort of stuff to hospitals. And they're also in the hospital informatics business, so they're trying to do data analytics on the kind of data that gets collected by these machines that they're selling to hospitals. So that obviously gives a privacy problem. That's why in the Philips research department we started looking into privacy-preserving solutions. And one of the things we did is we started this collaboration with a few universities and with Alexandria Institute that Peter is working, which we started looking at multi-party computation as a way of doing medical data analytics. Well, I'm not working there anymore. Actually, since March I'm doing something completely different. I'm now a patent attorney in training. So, yes, I think quite different. So, if there's any question about patents, you're always afraid to ask, and here's your chance. But this is the one I'm presenting today. So, this is about multi-party computation, and it was explained before. So, multi-party computation is where you have different parties, and they want to perform a joint computation on their respective sensitive inputs. So, just a very simple example. Consider you have 3 guys. Each of them has a pack of money. They want to find out who is the richest of the 3. So what they can do is to perform a multi-party computation protocol, and the output of that multi-party computation protocol will be, for instance, computation over all of their respective inputs. So that's the height of their stacks of money. So the output would be who is the richest guy, for instance. And the thing about the multi-party computation protocol is that it allows you to do this kind of computation without leaking anything about the inputs of the different parties. So there's many different kinds of techniques for multi-party computation. A very common technique for using multi-party computation is secret sharing. So there, the computation that you're doing is, for instance, is a kind of arithmetic circuit, so a circuit comprising additions and multiplication, that kind of stuff. And each of the values that you're computing in the circuit is then secret shared among the parties that are doing computation. So for instance, this guy has a share, this guy has a share, and this guy has a share, and they might add up, for instance, to the sensitive value, but in such a way that no individual party knows what they're computing on, but together the knowledge is kind of there. And there's different variants, different kind of security notions for multi-party computation. So multi-party computation protocols can be actively or passively secure, meaning that they only guarantee privacy and correctness if everybody follows the protocol, that's when they're passively secure, or they also guarantee that if some parties try to actively interfere with the outcome. Another kind of classification is between honest majority and full threshold protocols. So in honest majority, protocols only work if a majority of parties are honest. So for instance, in the three-party setting, they only work against one corrupted guy, but there's also full threshold protocols that also work regardless of how many other parties are corrupted. And the protocols that I will be talking about today are actively secure protocols in the honest majority setting. Specifically, we want to look at practically efficient multi-party computation, so to make things really fast and communication efficient in practice. And then one of the big questions there is actually how much communication and how much computation do you need to perform such a multi-party computation for a particular setting. So for instance, for an actively secure honest majority protocol. And that typically also depends on the number of parties that you have in the computation. As I said, usually a multi-party computation is done over an arithmetic circuit using additions and multiplications. And actually the thing that you're interested in is optimizing multiplications, because additions are basically for free, and multiplications are what actually involves communication between the parties that you want to minimize as much as you can. So if this is kind of line showing how efficient multi-party computation can be, then of course passive security in the honest majority setting is kind of the easiest setting that you can work on, and there the fundamental results have already been known for a long time, so actually since the 70s. And basically, if you want to perform a three-party computation, you can do so for every multiplication by having each party send one value to one other party. And if you're in the n-party setting, so with an arbitrary number of parties, you can do so with every party sending 3 values per multiplication. Now if we look at the completely other side of the spectrum, so active security and full threshold. So the development of really practically efficient protocols for that has been going on basically for the last 6 years or something. It started with Speed's protocol, and there have been many follow-ups on that. And basically the state of the art now is that if you have 3 parties, then the amount of communication that you need is roughly in the order of 100, 130 values that you need to send for each multiplication. And then the active honest majority setting is kind of in between. And there the current state of the art is a protocol from last year by Lindell and Leuven, which basically does one multiplication by sending 4 values for each party has to send 4 values. And the n-party setting, so with an arbitrary number of parties, you can do it with every party sending 42 values. The question that we want to focus on is, say, this gap, how big actually is it? So between the 1 and the 4, what's actually the best that you can do? And what we present in this paper are some improvements to this work. 2 different constructions. One of them where we show that you can actually do this using 2 values for each multiplication. In the 3-party setting and in the n-party setting, you can do it with 6 values. In the second construction, we divide things in an offline phase and an online phase, where in the online phase you only need 4/3, so roughly 1.3 values for each multiplication, at the expense of an offline phase where you need a little bit more. And I should compare this to a paper which will appear at Crypto this year, and which has already been presented at some conferences before, where they actually achieve more or less the same results, so also 2 values per multiplication in the 3-party setting. They have 12 values per multiplication in the multi-party setting, but probably actually they can optimize it to 6 if they do some of the things from our paper. Okay. So let's see. So the first construction. So essentially the idea of the first construction is to start with a passively secure protocol, so a protocol that does not prepare or that does not protect against people who are trying to interfere with the protocol, and try to make that into an actively secure protocol. The core idea to do that is, this has been used in several other papers as well, is that if you look at multiplication protocols that are used in passively secure protocols, actually these multiplication protocols are actually already quite close to being actively secure. So what they actually are, they are actively secure up to additive attack. What that means is that whenever you perform a multiplication, then the output will be a times b plus some value delta, where for every multiplication that happens in the circuit, basically the adversary can add the value that he wishes. And this value is independent from the input value. So he does not learn any information about the input value. So privacy is already satisfied by common multiplication protocols. And And also this value delta cannot depend on the inputs or anything. He can just, for every multiplication that happens in the circuit, you can just choose one value to add to that multiplication. Basically, so what you want to do is you want to make sure for every multiplication that takes place in the protocol that this delta value is 0. And if you do that, then you have both privacy and correctness. And typically, the way that is done in previous works is that you basically, for every multiplication that takes place, you're going to add some extra gates that kind of check the result of this multiplication. So for instance, they repeat this multiplication on some random value, add some randomness, and open the result and somehow compare it. And that way you can ensure that every multiplication took place that was done correctly. And there are several constructions for that, and basically the previously best known result was used 4 to 6 multiplications for each gate in the circuit. So that's quite an overhead, so that gives you an overhead for adding active security to a passively secure protocol, basically of a factor of 4, 5, 6. So how can we improve it? So if checking multiplication is so difficult, then how can we try to improve it? And the solution we propose here is simply not, so we're not going to improve the way that multiplications are checked. Instead, we're going to check many multiplications at once in one single check. There is actually a technique for this that was already known from the literature. It was proposed in 2012. Somehow this never really got used in the practical MPC setting. Maybe people thought it was inefficient or something, but in this paper we show that actually you can apply this, and this gives you actually very efficient results. So let me explain how this works. So this batch-wise verification trick. So the setting here we have as follows. So there have been n multiplications that took place in the protocol. So n values a1 up to an that have been multiplied by n values b1 up to bn to get n values c1 up to cn. And we want to check that all of those multiplications were performed correctly, so that each of those ci's is actually the product of the ai's times the bi's. And the main idea of this batch-wise multiplication verification is that you're going to write these n equations over numbers as one single equation over polynomials. How do you do this? Well, you can do this by interpolation. So based on these values a1 to an, you can define the polynomial a of x just by polynomial interpolation. So you define this polynomial to be the polynomial that in the point 1 has the value a1, in point 2 it has the value a2, etc. up to the value n, it has the value an. So this gives you a polynomial of degree n minus 1 in the value, in the variable x, in which the values that you use for the multiplication kind of occur in the coefficients in front of those x. You do the same for the b, you do the same for the c. And basically, what then happens is that all of these different checks, that all of the multiplications were performed correctly, become a single check that this polynomial times this polynomial is this polynomial. So there's a single polynomial equation that you can check, and if this polynomial equation holds, it means that all of the multiplications have been performed correctly. Now, of course, this doesn't really help us if there's no efficient way to actually check that polynomial equation. So that will be the first thing we need to do. So we need to efficiently check that this polynomial identity holds. And then there's a slight thing that I didn't tell you about this polynomial c of x, so we somehow will need to fix that. And that's the second thing that we have to do. And if we have done those two things, then we have found a very efficient way of checking the multiplications. So we have this polynomial equation. So the setting is that each party has secret shares of its values ai, bi, and ci. And they want to check that this polynomial equation, where the polynomial a of x, polynomial b of x, and the polynomial of c of x follows from these values, that this polynomial equation is satisfied. And to make this work, we have 3 different observations. First one is a well-known result, it's the Schwarz-Siebel lemma, that actually if you want to verify that the polynomial equation holds, you don't need to look at each coefficient one by one. Actually, it suffices to just check that the polynomial equation holds in one single randomly chosen point. So if you choose a random point s, and a of s times b of s is equal to c of s, then very likely, actually, the polynomials will be equal. And this is an elementary result from algebra, and if the values that you're computing on are large enough, then the probability that this equation will hold if the multiplications are not correct is very small. So if we check this and the multiplication and a of s times b of s is equal to c of s, then very likely actually the multiplication will be performed correctly. That's the first observation. Second observation is that so we need to evaluate polynomial A, B, and C in this random point S. Second observation is that everybody, if each party just knows the value S, so the point S, then actually this does not require any communication. So basically, if this value S is a fixed value that's known by everybody, then the value A of S is just a linear combination of these values A1 up to AN, where the coefficients depend on this value S. And computing linear combinations in multi-party computation you can do for free without any communication. So basically, every party can compute its secret share of A of S and its secret share of B of S and C of S locally without requiring any communication. If point S that they are going to evaluate on is publicly known. So that's the second observation. Final observation is this one. So if we have the A of S and B of S and C of S, we still need to check actually that the product holds, so that A of S times B of S is C of S. Third observation is actually we can do this in the plane. So if there's just a single triple out of all of these multiplications that were performed that consists of random values, so random values that are not known to any of the parties, then that implies automatically that the value of A of S is completely random, so it does not leak. If there's one triple that's random, so A of, for instance, A and B and C are random, then this value of A of S does not leak any information about all of the other values in the triple. The same for BS and the same for CS. So if one of the triples is random, then we can check that this multiplication holds simply by locally computing A of S, B of S, and C of S, reconstructing the values and checking that it holds in the plane. So these three observations give us a very efficient way of checking, performing this batch-wise verification. This actually gives us multiplication checking protocol. So first we just perform our normal passively secure multi-party computation. We just evaluate the circuit that we want to evaluate. Then we get at the point where we want to know if the result that we computed was actually correct. So for that we need to pick a random public S. So you need to have a small protocol to select this value randomly. That's just exchanging a few messages. Then everybody can just locally compute their shares of the values AS, BS, and CS. That's a local computation, doesn't require any communication. Then the parties exchange their shares of A of S, B of S, and C of S. That's just exchanging a few shares. And then everybody can just check that this equality holds in the plane. If it's true, we know that the multiplications were performed correctly. If it's not true, then there must be something wrong and we terminate without opening any of the results. So that's the main idea. There's just one problem that I didn't talk about before. So that's the polynomials A of X, B of X, and C of X. Let's look at that a bit more in detail. So we define the polynomial A of X by interpolation as the polynomial of degree n-1 that's equal to each of the values that we used in the multiplication. The same for B of X. But now if we look at polynomial C of X, and we want that to be equal to the product of AX and BX, then actually that means that CX will be a polynomial of degree, let's say, 2n-2, because this one is an n-1 degree polynomial, and this one as well. So the product will be 2n-2. So actually, if we interpolate C of X just from the values that we used in the multiplication, that will not actually give us the right polynomial that will give this equality. But we can solve this. Basically, we need to just have another n-1 evaluations of this polynomial C of X, and then perform the interpolation from that. So basically, we just need A and B we can already define from the multiplications themselves, but to define C we need to have n-1 additional multiplications. So that's just what we do. So we're going to compute n-1 additional values of the C just by taking polynomial A and B, which we know, and evaluating those polynomials in n-1 additional points, multiplying those values. That gives us new values for C, and that we can use to perform the interpolation. So basically what that means is that for every multiplication that we do in the protocol, we need to do one extra multiplication to get this extra value of Ci. That gives us the overhead of performing the batch-wise check, because we need to, for each multiplication, perform an extra one. That's the first thing, and then after we've done that, we can just do the multiplication check batch-wise. We just need to check one multiplication, and that's just a constant number of messages that you need to exchange. So a small work of that you to do per batch of multiplication triples. So that's the first construction. Now that we have this question, or this protocol, it's very nice, but the question is, we have reduced the communication by quite a bit. Can we reduce it even more? Of course, if I ask the question, the answer will be yes. There's a slight but. It will be only a reduction in the online phase of the protocol, where we need to do a small offline phase to achieve this reduction. That's our second construction. There, the basic idea is we start with a two-party protocol, and we turn that into a three-party protocol. And for that, we base ourselves on the Speech protocol. So Speech is a family of protocols that give you actively secure full threshold AUC. So that's multi-party computation, for instance, between two parties. That also works if the other party is corrupted. So how this Speech family of protocols works is basically, so to achieve this active security, what they do is they perform the computation on the values themselves, but at the same time they do it for the max of those values, so a kind of MAC. So basically on each value, for each value x, they also keep a value alpha times x, and they perform the whole computation, so that's for every value of computation, they have both the value x and the value alpha of x. And basically in the end they just check if the value of alpha times x in the end was correct, and if it's true, that kind of guarantees you that the computation was performed correctly. And to perform multiplications in this protocol, they use so-called multiplication triples. So that basically means, so if you want to perform a computation between two values that you have in the protocol, what you do is you kind of randomize those values using a multiplication triple, where you have a bunch of them in a kind of storage that you can use during the computation. So you randomize the values that you're going to multiply, and then somehow you can compute secret shares of the product of the value using those randomized values and the shares of those multiplication triples that you have before. You can only use them once, so before the protocol you perform a pre-processing phase. In this pre-processing phase you generate those triples, and then during the online phase you can use them to perform the multiplication. So what's this pre-processing phase? That's actually not very nice, so you need to have all kinds of difficult crypto to do that. So for instance, typical instantiations use somewhat homomorphic encryption and zero-knowledge proofs and all that kind of stuff. And that gives you a large overhead compared to the passively secure protocols that we were looking at. So that's, I mentioned the number 130. That was the overhead of achieving actively secure multi-party computation, the full threshold setting. That's because of these kinds of things, because of the use of homomorphic encryption and zero-knowledge proofs. So that's what we want to eliminate to get a really efficient protocol. And now the core idea here, we start from this two-party protocol, but now we say, okay, except instead of having those two parties perform this pre-processing as an interactive protocol between themselves, why not have a third party do the pre-processing? So instead of those two parties generating these things in some kind of computation using somewhat homomorphic encryption, instead we will have a third guy who just generates the triples in the plane and then sends them to those two guys who perform the computation. So this idea itself, we did not make it up ourselves. So it was known kind of in the state of the art. It was just never used in any construction that we are aware of. But still, it's a very nice idea. So that eliminates the homomorphic encryption. Of course, there's a problem with this thing. So if you have a third party generate these triples for those two guys, how do they actually know that the triples are correct? How do they know that actually the value AB here is actually the product of A and B? If it's not, then the whole computation will give wrong results. Normally this will be done using zero-knowledge proofs. So zero-knowledge proofs actually check that these multiplications were correct. Now what we do in this paper, we simply replace zero-knowledge proofs by the batch-wise multiplication verification, very similar to what we did before. And that gives a very efficient way of checking that those triples made by the third party are actually correct. So, just a very brief overview of how that looks like. So we have a third guy. Third guy makes multiplication triples, so values, max, secret shares in between those two parties. Now those two parties receive the multiplication triples and want to check that they're correct. Basically they do it in kind of the same way as before. So they define these polynomials A, B, and C based on the values, the triples that they received. And they're evaluating them in a random point S. That's unknown to this guy. And then they're just going to check that these polynomial evaluations are correct. As before, we need to have those extra products, otherwise this polynomial C is not defined. But that we can easily do by having this party just generate these values, C, secret share them as well. And basically what you end up with is that pre-processing a single multiplication triple and checking that it's correct essentially costs 5 field elements or 5 values that needs to be sent by a single party. So that's the second construction. So, to conclude, I've presented two different constructions to achieve honest majority multi-party computation with active security. The first one was based on the idea of making a passively secure protocol actively secure by checking these multiplications. That gives you three-party computation with two field elements. Because multiplication used to cost one field element, we need to do one extra, so we end up with two. Similarly, for the n-party case, you can actually get 6. I think it says 12, but it should be 6. That was the first construction. The second construction used the idea of taking the speech protocol, so protocol in the pre-processing phase, and having those pre-processed triples used or generated by an interested party, and that gives you those performance results. There is some extra computation you need to do. You need to do all this polynomial, difficult stuff with polynomials. Actually, we show in the paper that this is not so hard. And actually, in practical settings, you can easily do this. Just you can saturate a network line just using a simple computer. Paper has some more options, more which we'll look at. Here's the contact information. Please let me know if you have questions.
Okay, so go back to the speed one.
Yeah.
Right, so the idea of having a trusted dealer dealing with things, that's also been done in the paper with Tim did where you last year where you have actually multiple parties to be generating triples.
Yeah.
But also, I don't understand why you need a complex protocol here. If you've got Bill Gates producing triples like sending out as fast as the network happens, these guys could just run a sacrifice protocol.
Yeah, indeed, but that gives you, I think, more overhead. So basically, you need to pre-process two triples then, right?
Yeah.
And these parties need to perform one multiplication to do that.
Yeah.
In this case, you need to generate only one triple. And basically, to check that all of the triples are correct, because you...
Bill Gates is going to be producing triples faster than you can possibly use them.
I'm sorry?
Bill Gates is doing nothing. You can produce triples as fast as you can use them. It doesn't make any... I don't see why you're paying...
It says...
You're going to be paying CPU cycles.
Yeah, that's true. But if you make an implementation, then actually the cost of doing this extra computation is weighs up against. For instance, if you have a wide area network, for instance, you can easily generate as many triples as you want using the processor. Then the computation is really the communication is really the bottleneck.
So for this problem with the polynomials, why don't you define the product mod and f of x, let's say, and you evaluate the a's and the b's in the roots of this f of x.
You mean in order to not make this a polynomial?
Yeah, of degree 2n minus 2, right? So you just define a polynomial of degree n, which is f of x, and it has some roots. And you just evaluate, instead of in 1 up to n, you just take these roots, and then you have ring homomorphism, which is fine. You don't need these extra elements.
And this Schwarz-Zipper lemma would still guarantee that A of S times?
Yeah, that might be...
That would be the question. But it's very, if that would work, that would be great. That would give you active security tables for free. Yeah, but that's... Thanks for that.
Good. Thanks.
Great. You need the mic.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so Samuel Bonalucci is going to talk about the best in both worlds. Yeah.
So hello, this is joint work with Daniel Jenkin and Doug Gordon. Well, first of all, I'm not going to talk about what MPC is because I was lucky enough that it's already been well described. So, pre-processing. So let's have a quick look at speeds. So in speeds you have M players running an MPC protocol speeds requires pre-processing. It has full privacy, so as long as there's at least one honest part, there's full privacy, so no information gets revealed even if up to n-1 players are corrupt. But it has a large communication overhead. So if you have n players, each player needs, for each multiplication, to send an element, so there's order n elements per multiplication. And it's not robust, so everyone can cause a protocol of speeds to abort, because you have just one player send a bad share, and then the result is faulty, the Mac won't check, and we won't be able to reconstruct the correct result. So what our result is trying to come up with something that sort of qualified this. So we're going to use pre-processing. We won't require an honest majority for security, so the protocols for, VSS type protocols, secret, we can't apply those techniques. What we can do is we have the option to add robustness, so we can make the protocol more robust. But of course, making a protocol more robust means you have to sacrifice some privacy. And then we can actually do a constant number of communication per multiplication by using packed secret sharing. So basically, we don't need, for each multiplication, we can do many multiplications in parallel. So our result in more detail is we have a best of both worlds. So we can have privacy against T players, and we can be robust against n-T over 2 players. So this is a good trade-off, and robustness means that everybody's going to get the answer if there's that many corruptions, and it's also been called guaranteed output delivery in full security. MPC has a rich history. And as I said, the overhead is, it's order 1 overhead per multiplication, and we need for that there's a large majority of players, to be honest. So the idea that what we're going to do, the high-level overhead, is we'll run some computation with the dealer. And the computation succeeds if the dealer is honest and less than n-T over 2 corruption. So there's a small number of corruption, and we'll always have security as long as less than T players are corrupt. And if the dealer turns out to be bad, well, we can just replace him, and with less than a 2 computation, we should have the correct output. So before I can go into description of the protocol, any questions? So before we go into the description of the protocol, we sort of have to describe 2 things. First of all, the concept of additive attacks, which he went a little bit, the previous talk went a little bit into, and then Shamir's secret sharing. So when we have an additive attack, we can compare it to the normal evaluation of a circuit. So with the normal evaluation of a circuit, you have an input X, and then the circuit just gets evaluating, and you get the output of the circuit. But in the additive attack scenario, what you have is that the adversary can tamper with each wire by adding a constant to that wire, a constant value to that wire, and he knows exactly what that constant is. So in the simulated world, basically you can reconstruct the value that's being added to the computation. So we know the normal computation, layer per layer. This is very normal. So let me show you a description of the additive attack with a description. So here I've sort of divided into, the depth, the attacks that are taking place. So the original input is 1, 2, 3. So this wire is 1, this wire is 2, this wire is 2, this wire is 3. Now what happens, of course, is the first layer of additive attacks get put in. So 3 gets added here, 1 gets added to the 2 here, the 4 gets added to the 1, the 2 here, and the 1 gets added to the 3 here. So this is the first layer of additive attack. This changes the values. Then we run evaluation for the next layer of the circuit, and then we apply these 2 values to these 2 wires. So this is the attacker decided, here's how we modify the value of the wires, and this changes the value of the wires. Then there's an evaluation, and then finally this wire gets added to the output. This value gets added to the output, and this is the type of attack that is called an additive attack. And why we talk about additive attacks is because many MPC protocols naturally sort of semi-honest protocols naturally have this kind of, they're almost secure, but they have this weakness. And fortunately for us, a very nice paper basically said, well, if you have a protocol that's only weak to additive attack, well, there's a way to compile the protocol so that these additive attacks essentially become ineffective, because you can make it so that if somebody tries to do an additive attack, well, by sort of computing a map within the computation, by modifying the circuit in such a way, you can actually detect that there was tampering. So basically, the compiler of JIPST14 basically says, here's how we can prevent it. And the advantage of this compiler is that it only introduces a constant overhead. So you're multiplying only by a factor. Yes, and so why this is useful for our work is we can, basically what we'll show is that our protocol is secure up to additive attacks, and then on top of it we can apply their framework, so we don't need to really worry about it more. So we can chase, here our protocol is secure under additive attacks, that means it can be efficiently compiled into a protocol that's just plainly secure. Out of curiosity, how many people already know what Shamir secret sharing is? Oh wow, that's a really good proportion. So it's a secret sharing that's additive. Any set of T players can recover the secret. Any set of T-1 players cannot recover the secret. So most of us know how to share this, do a sharing, but just for a quick description, basically this is the secret, and you just select a random polynomial that passes through the secret, and then you just give each player a point on this polynomial, and you get the properties that you want. This is maybe less well known about Shamir secret sharing, but it's related to Reed-Solomon code, and it has a natural robustness property, meaning that by applying Reed-Solomon decoding, you can correct up to n-t over 2 errors. And this is kind of a cool thing that's to know, and because then just applying Shamir secret sharing already gives us some robustness. Yes, so we can recover secret from n shares as long as there are less than n-t over 2 bad shares. And this is where we're going to get our robustness from. And of course, we can also pack multiple secrets using a packed version of Shamir secret sharing. So instead of just sharing a single value, you can share a vector of values. And the idea is that you'll take the points -1 up to -n, and those will encode the polynomial, and you'll just pass a sample random polynomial that passes through these values at -1 to -m, and so you'll have to sacrifice a little bit of privacy and reconstruction. So exactly this, like these are secrets, and of course you'll share points in the same way as you did before for Shamir secret sharing. All right, for notational convenience, we're going to use something similar to what Speed did. So we'll use X and Y we'll use the box notation to denote the sharing, and for the sharing of X, I'm going to let it be a threshold T1, and for the sharing of Y, I'll let it be a threshold of T2 for just description. So when you add 2 shares, the privacy threshold is actually the maximum between these 2 values, and you can do the sum of secrets by just locally adding the values of the shares of the points of the polynomial, and you can also do the product, but one thing that's important is that the reconstruction threshold, the sum of it, if it took only a value, if this one took T1 to reconstruct and T2 to reconstruct this one, then the reconstruction grows by the sum of these 2 values. So now we sort of have the background of what we need for our things. So first I'm going to present a semi-honest version of my protocol. So this is a version that, you know, is going, it's sort of going to be a building block toward short description that will help us go towards the full description of the protocol. So first of all, we'll talk about the simple beaver triple. How do we use beaver triples? Well, a beaver triple is shared values A, B, and C such that C equals A times B. And of course, it's kind of, who knows what who's seen beaver values before? Okay, that's a big amount. But essentially, if you're given such a beaver triple and you're given sharings of X and Y, then it's possible to compute shares of X times Y efficiently. So the players can broadcast shares of X plus A and Y plus B. And then, of course, the players can reconstruct the value of X plus A and Y plus B. And then they can basically compute X times the sharing of X times Y by taking a sharing of X, multiplying it by Y plus B, then taking a sharing of Y and multiplying by X plus A. Then they can subtract the value of X plus A and times Y plus B, and then they can add a sharing of A times B. So this is just the simple beaver triple. And of course, you know, everybody broadcasting values is kind of expensive. So what we can do is we can reduce the communication by just using a dealer. So the dealer is just somebody who's responsible for, you know, getting a value and sharing it. So it's the same thing, but instead of broadcasting, they're just sending everything to the dealer. And of course, if we're doing this, you know, using additive secret sharing, it's going to be communication of order and field elements because the dealer is going to share X plus A and Y plus B. So here, what we're going to do for optimization is that we're going to use Shamir secret sharing. And we're actually going to use two types of, two thresholds of secret sharing scheme. One that is going to be a private secret sharing scheme. So the goal of this secret sharing scheme is just to hide values. And it's going to be T private, and it's going to have to be N minus T over 2 robust. And this is going to give us for privacy. And then we also have the red, a sharing which I'm going to use the red, which is a secret sharing of Y for packing. So it's going to be of low degree, but it's going to be used just for packing. So instead of sending the values to players in particular, we can send a share. The dealer is going to send a sharing so that by sending a single field element to each player, he's actually going to be sharing a vector of elements. And so by having the degrees, by using a high degree multiplied by a low degree, well, it's going to allow the dealer to reconstruct the values, even though if we just had used this one for privacy and we multiplied this would be infeasible. So X times Y is going to denote the pointless product as we've seen before, and the dealer can recover X times Y from each player locally, taking their shares of X and multiplying locally their share of Y. So the protocol that Beaver triple with dealer and of course packing is the same is very similar. Player sends the sharing of X plus A and the sharing of Y plus B. And the dealer, all he does is he takes these sharing, reconstructs the value, and then reshares it using a low degree polynomial. This is a fairly standard trick, which is called degree reduction. Now, the players, they send you know, the formula we sort of had before, plus some masked values so that, you know, he can't learn information about the product exactly. The dealer is, of course, once again going to reshare this value, because if the dealer can learn a value and it's still secure, then everybody can learn a value, so we can use a low degree polynomial. Then, of course, we're just going to reuse the formula as we did before. And now, the advantage of using this by using Beaver multiplication is that order n multiplications using order n communication. So now we've used, basically what we've done is we've taken triples, but with packing, and use them to securely realize a packed version of multiplication protocol for Beaver. Any questions here? Okay. Any questions? Okay, good. So now we're sort of going to discuss the problem with this semi-honest solution. And so there's two main problems. If the dealer is honest, well, the corrupt players can send him bad shares. And if the dealer is corrupt, he can reshare the wrong value, or he can distribute shares that are not consistent with a low-degree polynomial. So instead of sharing using the red sharing, he's going to share with a polynomial of high degree. And this is actually going to be a much more devastating attack. Okay, so let's quickly go through the cases. So the first case is we have an honest dealer and a small number of corrupt players. Well, if there's a small number of corrupt players, well, he's going to receive shares. Well, if the dealer is honest and he receives shares, and there's very few bad shares, less than n-t/2, well, he can apply Reed-Solomon decoding and basically say, hey, these are bad shares. Let me discard them and recompute what the value actually is, and in this way he can completely ignore the corrupt players. So if there's not too many corrupt players, we can just ignore what the corrupt players are sending. Okay. What if there's a large number of corrupt players? Like more than half, but not enough to break privacy? Well, what we can do is by looking at what the corrupt players are sending, we can, one will have the ideal world. But for now, in the real protocol, what's going to happen is that the dealer, just by looking at so the bad players, when they send bad shares, we can look at their bad shares. And based on their bad shares, without even knowing what the honest players are sending like shares, we can determine that what's going to happen next. Is the dealer going to fail to reconstruct a secret because Reed-Solomon codes failed? Or he's going to determine if the adversary, by sending these corrupt shares, is actually performing an additive attack. And you're wondering, okay, how can we prove this? Well, it follows from the wonderful fact that Shamir secret sharing is equivalent to a linear error correcting code. So basically, what we can say is what's going to happen by errors just by looking at what the error vector is. So decoding error what happens to decoding only depends on the error correcting code. So basically, I'm running short, but here's what the summary is. For the honest dealer, we can completely remove it because it's either an additive attack, or we can ignore it, or it's an abort. Malicious dealer who reshares the wrong value with the right degree polynomial, equivalent to an additive attack. So the more devastating attack is split the universe attack. And the idea behind the split the universe attack is that you divide the set of parties into two sets. One set you share y plus b, the other set you share y plus b plus 1. And the players that in both sets, well, you'll give them the same share. And dealer learns X by looking at the shares he receives. So the protocol here is the same. The only difference is between y plus b and y plus b plus 1. You look at the difference between this equation and this equation, and you notice that the only difference is between this value multiplied by this value, and in this way he can learn X. So by sharing a polynomial of too high degree, he can screw up everything. So what we need to do is, how do we deal with this problem, is we basically come up with a really cool proof whose idea is the following. We're going to force him to prove to everyone that he's sharing a polynomial of low degree. And the basic idea is that we're going to have a secret that the dealer is only going to be able to learn if he actually shared a polynomial of low degree. And it's kind of a cool proof because he's proving a statement to a set of players so that no player actually has the entire statement. And so, so of course this proof needs to have low overhead, so only a constant communication per player. And the idea is that the dealer can only reconstruct it if the dealer shares a polynomial of low degree. And so it's going to have a pre-processing on one. The idea is that you're going to randomly sample the pre-processing is going to randomly sample one polynomial of degree q such that it has degree n minus d minus 1, such that q of 0 equals 0. And you're going to choose a polynomial of degree n minus 1, which is a random value, and you're going to pick the secret to be r of 0. So this is a random secret, and this is a polynomial of degree. And then each player is going to receive qi. So when each player receives a point of the polynomial p, they're going to multiply it by qi and add ri to it. Now, the player is going to send this, and then the dealer is going to recover the secret. And this is going to be a proof of low degree. Why is it going to work? Well, if the polynomial has degree d or less, well, he has enough shares to reconstruct the secret, and then he can use the secret as a proof that he acted honestly. But what happens if the degree is too high? Well, it turns out that the resulting polynomial is going to have a higher degree, has degree n, and he does not have enough shares to recover the secret. And basically, the secret is going to remain hidden, and so he's going to have no information about the secret, and he's going to be unable to do this. And it's basically just take the polynomial, which is of low degree, multiply it by a higher polynomial, and if the polynomial is of too high degree, then the secret is lost. Otherwise, you can get the secret. Really quickly, the degree testing protocol, this protects you against a malicious dealer, but you might not be able to succeed because some of the players decided not to send the right shares. So how do you verify that the dealer sent the right shares, that the player sent the right shares? Well, we're going to employ a speed-style homomorphic map to make sure that during this protocol that they are actually sending the correct shares. And of course, the dealer can eliminate corrupt players. This still leaves the problem of how do you replace shares of corrupt players? And basically, we're going to reuse the same Q for each degree test. We're going to use a fresh R, and then we're going to share the value of each player. Each share that each player is given is going to be also be shared among all the other players. So we're going to do a sharing of the share for the degree test. So. Quick conclusion, we can construct the protocol for MPC which is secure without an honest majority. It's going to require pre-processing, best of both worlds, so we have a trade-off between robustness and privacy. It enables low overhead communication, so we can do packing, and we have a novel degree test. So it's a really cool degree test protocol where interactive proof where the statement is distributed. So no player has the statement, the statement is distributed among multiple players. So I'd be interested to see if we can do a speeds version of a protocol where we're using max to verify the entire computation. Can we do a better trade-off going from n minus t over 2 to n minus t? So we need to do something better than Reed-Solomon decoding. Instantiate or pre-processing efficiently, or come up with a protocol that uses efficient pre-processing, and yeah, a better online phase. So thank you very much for listening. Any questions? No questions?
Let's thank him again. Okay, and the last speaker of this session is Koyan Wai. He's going to talk about three-party ORAM.
So I'm a PhD student at the University of California, Irvine, and today I'm going to talk about our 3PC secure computation ORAM with low latency, low bandwidth, and fast batch retrieval. And this is a joint work with my advisor, Untitled Chapter. Okay. So let me first introduce Oblivious RAM. So Oblivious RAM is a protocol for accessing outsourced memory while hiding the access patterns to data. So think about this, consider this scenario where there's a company here which outsources data to some cloud storage provider. However, there could be some adversary on the clouds trying to find out like the content of data by monitoring the data access. So even though the data is encrypted and stored on the cloud, by just looking at the data access pattern, maybe the adversary is still able to gain information about the data. So ORAM is for solving this problem. The ORAM guarantees that for two sequences of accesses with the same length, then these two sequences of access will be indistinguishable from each other. However, ORAM has its own problem, that ORAM assumes single client. So what if this company has like multiple terminals trying to access the same data? And if some of the terminals are corrupted by the adversary, then ORAM doesn't guarantee security for the rest of the client. So we have the problem that ORAM doesn't make clients secure against each other. One solution for this is that we do multi-party computation ORAM, so MPC ORAM. So for MPC ORAM, there will be no secret on client. So if there's a master key for encrypting the data, the master key will be secret shared, and the ORAM algorithm will be done in MPC style on secret shares. And now the client will only know secrets and only see like the input and outputs. So there's an alternative solution for the ORAM problem that you can do multi-client ORAM. But to the best of my knowledge, multi-client ORAM scheme do not scale very well with many clients. So we'll be focusing on this MPC ORAM solution. So here's the diagram for MPC ORAM, that the data is now secret shared among multiple servers. And to do the data access, the client will generate secret sharing of the input, send each secret sharing to each server, and then after some MPC ORAM protocols, the output will be returned to the client also in secret shared format. So now, because there's no secret, so MPC ORAM preserves security for the non-compromised client. And note that the MPC ORAM client can be any internet client, and also MPC ORAM enables secure computation on large data. So for local computation, we can use standard MPC solution. And for data access, we can actually do MPC ORAM protocols. So our result is that we're doing, okay, so I forgot that to mention that there's also some problem with MPC ORAM. Is that what if like the adversary can compromise all the servers here? Then there's no security at all. So the assumption here is that we assume the adversary, the MPC ORAM adversary is only able to compromise a subset of the servers. Okay. So now our work is that we're doing MPC ORAM with 3 servers storing 1 compromised server. So which means 3 PC ORAM with honest majority. And our complexity is that, our complexity is log cuban, where n is a memory array size. And we also achieve like log n rounds, and we only use symmetric cryptography. So no fully homomorphic encryption, no public key crypto. And compared to the 2 PC ORAM with only inexpensive cryptography operations, our asymptotics is better because we don't have the secure parameter on the data block array size. And our concrete bandwidth, concrete computation bandwidth is also better. And we also support fast batch retrievals, data access. So this slide will be more clear once I finish my rest of the slides. Okay. So for constructing MPC ORAM, well, first there's some generic way to do it. So let's say we have a client-server ORAM, and if we do MPC on the client's algorithm, then we will get an MPC ORAM. So the example is that, so here we have a client with the master key, we have a server with the data encrypted under the master key. And now, if the client provides some address X, then through the ORAM protocol, the client can get the data at address X. So now we want to construct MPC ORAM for two parties. So first, there's nothing changed. So for this construction, there's nothing changed for the server algorithm. So this remains the same. And now we just need to do MPC on the client code, which means we will need to split this client into client 1 and client 2 with secret sharing of the master key. And also, as talked before, we will do secret sharing on the input. And now we have MPC ORAM code, or MPC code on the client's algorithm. But this code's interaction with the server still remains the same because we don't do any change with that. And finally, when returning the ORAM output, this output is also done in secret shared format. So now this whole thing is a 2PC ORAM because the party 1 of the 2PC ORAM can emulate the client 1 here, and the party 2 of 2PC ORAM can emulate this client 2 plus this server. So here I'm listing three most recent 2PC ORAM protocols. So namely circuit ORAM, square root ORAM, and floor ORAM. So the advantage of the circuit ORAM is that its complexity is polylog n. And for square root ORAM, even though its complexity is square root n, but it proves that for smaller n, like n is smaller than 2 to the power of 18, its concrete cost is actually better than circuit ORAM, even though its asymptotic cost is worse. And for floor ORAM, even though its bandwidth complexity is square root n and its computation is actually linear on n, but it proves that for small data block size and for some larger, like n to the n equals 2 to the power 30, its concrete cost can still be better than circuit ORAM and square root ORAM. And today, so our work will be more related to circuit ORAM because our improvements will be based on the polylog complexity. So I mentioned earlier that we are doing 3PC with honest majority, but what's like the motivation for it? Well, we see that sometimes when we do secure computation protocol with 3PC, it's often easier or more efficient to do it with than 2PC. So for example, if we do obvious transfer with 2-party, then it seems that we have to do operation equivalent to public key cryptography. However, if we do it with 3PC, with this additional party, then all we need to do are 4 XOR computation, which is a lot more efficient, I think. And in fact, for our 3PC ORAM scheme, we will use this trick to use a 3-party secret shared oblivious transfer variant to reduce some of our secure computation protocol cost. So before I continue with all the rest ORAM scheme I want to talk about today, because these schemes are all based on this binary tree ORAM construction. So I will first introduce this binary tree ORAM. So I will be omitting a lot of details, but basically the general idea is that the memory data array, the memory array, will be stored as this binary tree structure. And where each tree node, we can say it's a bucket holding some number of data blocks, where each data block could be a real data block or could be some data dummy or empty data block. So now to access some data blocks dn at address n, so first with this address n, we will be able to locate a tree path that is a guarantee that your data block must reside on that tree path. So at this point, what we need to do is to just do a linear scan on that tree path to find the data block dn you want to retrieve. So now, after the retrieval, we probably want to do some like cleaning up, like data relocation and shuffling, because if we don't move the data, the next time when we try to access the same data with the same address, then probably it's still at the same spot. So it's a different, it's obvious. It's not. It's kind of like a obvious access pattern. So some leakage. So we probably want to do some relocation on the data. So for this binary tree ORM algorithm, what we do is that we'll remove the data block we found from that tree path original position, and we will assign a new random tree path associated with this address n, and then we will insert this data block to the root of the binary tree this binary tree structure. And then if we stop here, then we have the problem that if we keep just inserting stuff to the roots, we will have some overflow issue at the roots or at the top levels of the tree. So we will use this eviction procedure to relocate the data. And there are two parts for this eviction. So first part is called eviction logic, which is to decide how to evict the data block along a path to prevent overflow at the top of the trees. And then there's also this final eviction movement part, that after we have decided how to evict data blocks along a path, this movement is the actual action for permuting data blocks in this path according to the logic, to the mapping, the permutation we have decided. So let's look at the 2PC circuit ORM as an example. So 2PC circuit ORM is does all these retrieval and eviction in a generic way using the well-known 2PC circuit computation, the garbage circuit protocol. So here what I really want to talk about is its eviction logic part. So how it determines how to evict data blocks along a path is that it uses a greedy approach, that at every tree level along this tree path, it always finds a deepest data block to evict. So what this means is that, okay, so on the right side, this is an abstraction of a tree path. So this bucket 0 is the tree root, and then the rest will be the tree node along this path. Okay, so at every level, we will find a data block that can be evicted deepest along this tree path. So recall that every data block, there's a tree path associated with it. And then here we also have eviction paths, which could be different from that tree, data block tree path. So the deepest level that this data block can go will be the lowest common ancestor tree level for this eviction, for this data block to go. So if we use this greedy approach to always pick the deepest level to evict, then some level maybe we can find one data block that can go to the next level. At some level maybe we cannot find any data blocks that can be evicted. But at some level maybe we can find data blocks that can be evicted, so like 4 levels down. So this eviction mapping is kind of irregular, but I'll ask you to trust me that this is still MPC friendly, that a 2PC circuit ORM can do it with low overhead garbage circuit. And I'll come back later on this irregular mapping. So because everything is done by garbage circuit for 2PC circuit ORM, so obviously this will be the bottleneck for this scheme, because now the total cost for 2PC circuit ORM will be the underlying ORM cost times the security parameter which comes from the garbage circuit. So, and before our work, there's actually some 3PC ORM scheme by Fiber and others. And how they do the retrieval eviction is that first, they use the 3-party 6-tree shared oblivious transfer protocol instead of the generic garbage circuit to reduce the cost. So there will be no garbage circuit security parameter blow up for this part of the cost. And then for their eviction logic, they are doing a pretty primitive eviction logic, such that for every level, they just find some blocks that can be evicted to the next level. It could be a real block or it could be a dummy block, if there's no such real block that can be evicted to the next level. And they do it for every level. So their eviction mapping is regular because this is public information that every time we do access, we do eviction, we always have this kind of mapping. So, and this is obviously MPC friendly because at every level you are doing the same operation. So they do it also with garbage circuit. And then for eviction movements, they're not doing garbage circuit anymore because the reason is really because they have a regular mapping. So we have talked about that the mapping on the tree level is public information. But what's secret is that which data block within each bucket to be evicted, this information is secret. So they can actually put some mask on this secret and generate a masked version of this eviction mapping, eviction permutation, and reveal this whole masked eviction permutation to one of the three parties. And in such a way, later on, they can do three-party secret obvious transfer to actually move the tuples, move the data blocks according to their eviction mapping without using the garbage circuit, so no security parameter at all for this part as well. Okay, but the problem is that because their eviction logic is primitive, so not like the circular like eviction algorithm, which evicts tuples, evicts blocks, data blocks more aggressively, because they are evicting these data blocks kind of slowly. Then to achieve the same overflow probability, they actually require these buckets to have capacity larger than the circular scheme. So this is like a new cost to their like complexity. So if we put these two schemes aside and compare, we see that for 2PC circular scheme, we have a better greedy eviction logic. And for 3PC ORM scheme by Fiber and others, we have cheaper retrieval cost as well as the cheaper eviction movement done by customized 3PC protocols. So now we're thinking, well, can we combine the advantages of these two approaches and have a new 3PC ORM scheme? Well, it turns out that we can actually do this, and we can actually do a little better by continue improving the complexity of the retrieval stage by replacing the secret shared OT protocol with the private information retrieval protocol. And we have talked about that in order to do eviction movement with secret shared OT protocols, we need to have a regular masked eviction mapping. However, we want to use this irregular mapping here from the 2PC circular wrap. So the challenge is really whether we can find some way to turn this irregular mapping or irregular permutation into some masked regular. So let's first look at our retrieval. So again, I will be omitting a lot of details, but the general idea is that we will use a very primitive two-server private information retrieval protocol for getting the data block we want. However, with three-party, we are doing like three-party secret sharing, but we are doing two-server peer. So in order to accomplish this, we will have to do 3 copies of the two-server peer by rotating each party's rows each time when doing each copy. And advantage for doing this is that now we have the bandwidth from the two-server peer is that the bandwidth is OL plus B, where L is the data array length and the B is the data block size, comparing to the secret shared OT approach where the complexity is OL times. And for our 3PC circular scheme, we have this observation that we can actually process a batch of fast retrievals without doing postponing the expensive data reshuffling eviction procedure. So we can do some number of access and then come back and then maybe do this cleaning offline. So the reason for doing this is that every time we do some access, we'll be removing that data block from the original position and then insert that to the root node. So as long as the root node has enough capacity for holding these new inserted data blocks, then we still we're not really violating the ORM invariant that at each time when we access, we either, if this address is not visited before, we will find it on some tree path associated with that address. And if it is accessed before, we'll definitely find it also on some random tree path where the roots will still contain that updated version of that data block. And from the previous slide, we see that by doing the retrieval with the peer protocol, we don't do any garbage circuit, so there's no security parameter blow up on the access cost. And also, in fact, for doing this binary tree ORM, we're actually doing it with a recursive binary tree structure. So for each retrieval, it actually takes log n number of runs. So naively, if you're doing a batch of B retrievals, the round will be a B times log n. But we can actually pipeline this process, and the number of rounds we get is B plus log n instead of B times log n. So now we come to the most fun part, to how to do our CPC circular eviction with this more aggressive but irregular mapping. So first, we still want to use the 2PC circular logic, right? So we take their eviction mapping directly first. And then we notice that because we are evicting some real blocks from level 0 to 1, so there must be some empty or dummy data blocks that got kicked out from this level 1. And again, because we are evicting some real data blocks from level 3 to level 7, then there must be some space open up at this level. So now what we can do is that we can actually evict this empty or dummy data blocks that got kicked out from level 1 and put it at this level 3. So we are adding some eviction jump, but because this eviction jump is working on some dummy block, it doesn't violate any invariant of the ORM algorithm. And then we can do the same thing or similar thing for all the other levels that doesn't have any eviction jump before. And after we adding all these like dummy eviction jumps, we now have a complete eviction cycle on this tree path. So now this eviction cycle is regular because at every level of the tree path, we have exactly one data block coming out and exactly one data block coming in. And at this point, if we apply some random permutation on the levels of the tree node, then we'll get another cycle which will contain no information about the previous real eviction cycle. So from here, we will have a masked version of the eviction mapping, and we can use that for the later cheaper secret shared obvious transfer protocol for the eviction movement. So here I'm listing the previous 2PC ORM complexity again, but adding the security parameters to it there. So basically you see that all the costs that will be the underlying ORM cost times this security parameter for all the 2PC schemes. And for the 3PC scheme by fiber, and because of its primitive ORM eviction logic, so we are adding this statistical security parameter because now we have larger bucket size. And then for our 3PC circular ORM scheme, because we are still using the same bucket size from the 2PC circular ORM because we are essentially doing the same eviction. So We still have garbage circuit for this part, so there's security parameter here, but for the real data movement, eviction movement, there's no security parameter, and there's no this statistical security parameter. And before I actually didn't mention, there's also some generic way to implement 3PC ORAM. And in fact, with this generic approach, you don't have to do garbage circuit at all. So there's no security parameter for your bandwidth complexity. However, for this approach, you actually, their round complexity is proportional to their ORAM algorithm circuit depth. So in concrete numbers, this complexity is just too large to, so really high latency. So if we look at the concrete bandwidth comparison between our 3PC serial scheme with some 2PC scheme, you see that our bandwidth, well, it's better than 2PC circular ORAM and 2PC square root ORAM, and it's kind of close to the 2PC floor RAM scheme. However, because the floor RAM scheme has square root and complexity, so eventually for large N, our bandwidth will be better. But, okay, if the bandwidth is close, then let's just compare some like computation time. So recall that the floor RAM actually has linear complexity for the computation, even though this their local computation can be highly parallelizable, but still for very small data size. So D equals 4 bytes. For some N equals 2 to the power of 30. For a single thread, their size time is 10 seconds, and with 16 threads, it still needs like 1.1 second for a single access. But for our scheme, because of the, I guess also reflected by the asymptotics, our runtime will be just only 0.3 seconds for a single access. Not to mention that our solution scales well also on the data size D. So for larger data size, I think our advantage is more ubiquitous. So to conclude, okay, we can use MPC ORAM so MPC ORAM enables secure computation on large data. So for example, we can do all sorts of database with multi-client security. And also we have seen that 3PC secure computation protocols could be more efficient than 2PC. And also we proposed a new 3PC ORAM protocol that still keeps the log n rounds low latency, and we improved asymptotics over both the 2PC ORAM scheme and the 3PC ORAM scheme by fiber and others. And we have seen that completely we have low bandwidth, and our scheme also supports fast batch retrieval, and our scheme scales very well with the data blocks.
Since we're a little bit over time, then we'll ask questions offline. And there's still an announcement to make, right?